The moment Noah Kingsley stepped into the Alien Sphere lounge, time itself seemed to hesitate. Outside, JFK Airport buzzed with chaos, boarding calls echoing, suitcase wheels grinding against the floor, and the weary hum of delayed flights. Inside, it was a different world entirely, a sanctuary of silence and polite whispers, imported orchids, and the scent of Italian leather, polished by money so old it had forgotten its origin. No one in that room knew that the quiet black man standing by the window could, with a single phone call, erase their entire world from the balance sheets of history. To them, he was just another well-dressed traveler, tall, composed, polite, unassuming. But beneath that calm exterior was the mind of a predator disguised as prey. Noah Kingsley, 41, was not born into the empire he now ruled. He had built it himself, brick by digital brick, while the men sipping $200 scotch nearby were still debating whether artificial intelligence would truly revolutionize logistics. It had, and he was the one who made it happen. As the founder and CEO of Ethereum Dynamics, Noah had transformed predictive energy modeling into a $1 trillion revolution. Governments called him a pioneer. Competitors called him ruthless, but he called himself necessary. Tonight's flight was not just another business trip. It was a disguised victory lap. In less than 24 hours, he would sign the acquisition of the Beaumont Group, a century-old European conglomerate that owned everything from private airlines to rare mineral mines. Soon, all of it would bear his logo. Yet as he gazed at the blinking runway lights against the dusk, a familiar chill settled in his chest, the weight of invisibility. He had been here before, in rooms where respect arrived late, in meetings where competence was doubted for no reason other than the color of his skin. He had learned to turn their condescension into a weapon, like a chess player letting his opponent believe they were winning. Adjusting the white gold cufflinks on his wrist. Elegant, understated. He glanced at his watch. Flight 372, Global Alien Airways, the very airline he was about to purchase. The irony made him smile faintly. He had chosen to fly commercial on purpose. No assistance, no press, no display of power. He wanted to experience the company from within, to observe how it operated, how it treated people, and where arrogance lived in the smallest gestures. At Gate 17, the first-class passengers were beginning to line up. Noah stood still, phone in hand. On the screen, his digital ticket glowed with one clear line. Seat 1A, VIP class. To him, it was just a number. To the world, it was a test. The check. An agent barely looked up. Passport, please? He handed it over calmly. She scanned it, smiled politely. The same professional warmth she had given to the elderly couple ahead of him, perhaps just a little softer. In her eyes, he was simply another wealthy traveler on vacation. That assumption wouldn't last long. As Noah walked down the jet bridge, the air changed, colder, carrying the metallic tang of machinery. Each step echoed with the weight of decisions that had once reshaped entire industries. He didn't yet know that in a few minutes, this narrow passageway would become the boundary between dignity and humiliation. Inside the cabin, a golden glow fell over champagne glasses and soft cashmere blankets. Passengers murmured in half whispers, half boasts about hedge funds and ski chalets. At the door stood Tessa Marlowe, the 40-ish head flight attendant, her smile sharp as a blade, posture perfected by thousands of hours serving the elite. "Welcome aboard, sir," she said, her eyes scanning him with practiced precision. Suit, watch, skin tone. There was the briefest flicker of hesitation. He noticed. He always noticed. "Noah Kingsley, seat 1A. She gave a slight nod, lowering her voice by half a tone as she gestured him inside. The VIP cabin was immaculate. White leather seats, ambient lighting, an atmosphere of complete control. Noah set down his briefcase, loosened his tie, and leaned back. His body relaxed, but his instincts did not. Years in business had taught him that imbalance always began in silence. Then he heard it, a voice near the front of the cabin, loud, sharp, dripping with outrage and entitlement. "This must be a mistake. I always sit in seat 1A. Noah turned his head. A man in his 60s stood there, face flushed red more from ego than age. Charles Whitford, a name Noah recognized from the acquisition files, a minor board member of the very conglomerate he was about to buy. His voice rose with every word, his gestures growing theatrical. The flight attendants bowed their heads, apologizing, double-checking devices. Tessa's polished smile returned, but this time it was directed at someone else. Noah lowered his gaze back to his book, though his jaw tightened. He had seen this play too many times before. Different stage, different actors, same script. He knew what came next. A polite request, a small misunderstanding, an assumption that certain seats belonged to certain kinds of people. And as he turned the page, a sharp, dangerous thought slipped through his mind. If they were about to make that mistake, they were going to learn exactly what it would cost. "Excuse me, sir." Tessa's voice was soft, but there was a thin layer of steel beneath it. Noah looked up, his eyes meeting hers, not quite hostile, but certainly not equal. "It seems there's been a system error with our seating arrangement," she said, avoiding his gaze. "Your seat, 1A, appears to have been double booked." Noah set his book down, a finger still marking the page. "It's not a mistake," he replied, calm and steady. "I confirmed this seat this morning. The ticket is still active right here." He lifted his phone, the blue screen clearly displaying Kingsley, Noah, seat 1A. But Tessa didn't look. Instead, she turned slightly toward Charles Whitford, who stood behind them, his face flushed with the outrage of a man convinced the world had wronged him. "I understand, Mr. Whitford," she said, in a lowered, respectful tone. "This must be a technical issue. I'll take care of it right away." Noah leaned back, his hand brushing against the smooth white leather of the seat. He heard every word. And deep inside, a familiar feeling rose again, the bitter awareness of having to justify his right to exist in a space he had paid to occupy. When Tessa turned back to him, her smile was gone. "Mr. Kingsley," she said, her voice now cold, "I'm very sorry, but this passenger is a Diamond Medallion member of Global Allian. According to policy, seat 1A is reserved for our highest tier clients." Noah looked straight at her, his expression unshaken. What policy states that? It's an internal regulation, she replied quickly, her lips trembling slightly, the telltale sign of someone lying before they even believed their own words. Internal regulations cannot override a paid booking, he said, his tone lower now but heavy with authority. I paid for this seat, and I am sitting in it. Charles snorted, his mouth curling into a smirk. Now, young man, he said in the patronizing tone of someone who'd spent a lifetime giving orders. There's no need to make a scene. They'll find you another seat, 4C maybe. I've sat in 1A for 15 years. The words young man struck like a slap, not loud, but enough to drain the air from the cabin. Noah took a slow, deliberate breath. 1, 2, 3. He turned toward Charles, his gaze steady. First, he said clearly, you don't have the right to call me young man. Second, I'm not arguing. I'm sitting in my assigned seat. The cabin fell silent. Tessa flinched slightly. Passengers began to glance over, half curious, half entertained. Under the soft light, Noah sat upright, his face composed, but in his eyes, anger didn't flare. It crystallized, cold and sharp as steel. Sir, Tessa began, tension creeping into her voice. I need you to cooperate. We have to resolve this before takeoff. Noah's reply was gentle but firm. And I need to remain seated in the place I paid for. If you continue to disturb me, I'll be filing a formal complaint. The words froze the air around them. Tessa blinked, her throat dry. Inside her mind, everything tilted. She couldn't understand why this passenger refused to yield. Most would have backed down by now. But his eyes, they were different. They made her feel as though she was the one being judged. She stammered, "You're being aggressive." "No," Noah said. "I'm simply not backing down." From the row behind, Charles let out a mocking chuckle. "You're making trouble for the entire plane." Noah tilted his head slightly and replied, "No, sir. I'm just not letting anyone take what's rightfully mine." Tessa turned away, her face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and anger. She strode quickly toward the cockpit, the sound of her heels striking the narrow aisle like small bursts of thunder. "Get the captain," she told the junior attendant, her voice shaking with indignation. "We have a non-compliant passenger." Meanwhile, Noah sat still, eyes on the window. He no longer saw the runway, only his own reflection in the glass. A man doubted simply because no one believed he belonged there. He brushed a thumb along the edge of his watch and allowed himself a faint, humorless smile. Soon, they would know just how costly their mistake truly was. Outside the cabin door, the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. Captain Walter Briggs was on his way toward him, and with him came an entire system of bias about to ignite the most expensive scandal in aviation history. The first-class cabin door swung open, and with the metallic echo that followed, the air inside seemed to change color. Captain Walter Briggs, broad-shouldered and imposing, stepped in like a general entering his battlefield. He carried with him a cold kind of authority, the kind built from years of giving orders, not listening to them. Tessa followed close behind, her face flushed, her breath quick and uneven. "Captain, that's him," she said, her voice still trembling. passenger in 1A. He refused to comply. We can't take off. Briggs glanced at her, nodded once, then turned to Noah. His eyes swept over him like a scanner. Dark skin, tailored suit, calm gaze. He saw everything except the truth. "You're Kingsley?" he asked curtly. Noah nodded slightly. "Yes." "I'm told you're sitting in the wrong seat." "No," Noah replied, setting his book down. "I'm sitting exactly where I paid to sit." Briggs folded his arms. "We have a priority passenger who needs that seat. I'm asking you to move to 4C, or you'll have to deplane." The silence that followed was sharp, almost physical. Every pair of eyes in the cabin turned towards the two men, one accustomed to giving orders, the other to running entire industries. Noah looked up, his voice calm but resonant enough for everyone to hear each word. "Captain Briggs, before you make a decision, perhaps you should check your passenger manifest. My ticket clearly states seat 1A. It's possible your staff made an error." Tessa inhaled sharply, ready to interject, but Briggs raised a hand to stop her. He didn't check. He didn't need to. In his mind, what he saw wasn't a system error. It was a man who didn't know his place. "Listen," Briggs said, his tone dropping like a verdict. "I'm responsible for this flight. When I tell you to move, you move. If not, I'll have to ask you to leave." A long beat passed. Noah slowly stood up. The movement wasn't submission, it was a warning. Taller than the captain by nearly half a head, he looked him straight in the eye, unblinking. "Before you ask me to leave this plane," he said, each word precise and cutting like a sharpened blade, "let me make one thing clear. Your flight attendant lied. She never checked the system and falsely accused me of being aggressive. You never asked me a single question before giving an order. You simply listened and judged." Briggs clenched his jaw. The air grew thick, heavy. "We have procedures, Mr. Kingsley." "And procedure says—" "No," Noah interrupted, his voice low but unwavering. "Every procedure is meaningless when it's driven by prejudice." The words made Briggs falter for a moment. This was no longer the protest of a passenger. It was the declaration of someone whose authority matched, perhaps exceeded, his own. From behind, Charles Whitford scoffed. "Enough of this. Get him off the plane, Captain. People like that don't belong in this cabin." Tessa shifted to the side, avoiding Noah's gaze. Briggs took a deep breath, his eyes turning cold. "Security will be here shortly. I won't let one uncooperative passenger delay my flight." Noah looked around. Faces pretended to stay buried in their phones, but every ear was listening. Some were recording. Others watched him with a mix of sympathy and fear. He spoke softly, but his words carried like a tremor through the cabin. "You can call security. But remember this, when they escort me off this plane, they won't just be removing a passenger. They'll be removing the future of the very airline you work for." Tessa frowned, not understanding. Briggs let out a short, dry laugh. "I don't care who you are." Noah's eyes hardened like steel. "That's exactly the problem, Captain. You should." Two security officers appeared at the door, their tone flat and firm. "Sir, the captain has requested that you leave the aircraft." Noah said nothing. He picked up his carbon fiber briefcase, the cabin light glinting across its surface like a pulse of electricity. He looked briefly at Tessa, who stood frozen, gripping her tablet so tightly she hadn't realized she'd never opened it. "There's no need for force," he said calmly. "I'll go." He stepped out of seat 1A and walked down the narrow aisle in utter silence. Only the distant hum of the engines filled the space, along with the bowed heads of passengers, not in respect, but in shame. Charles leaned back, satisfied. Finally, some peace. Tessa swallowed hard, a chill running down her spine. There was something in that man's eyes, calm yet utterly unforgiving. Briggs turned away, unaware that in the very moment he believed he had restored order, he had just shattered an entire airline empire with 2 words: "Get off." The sound of the cabin door closing behind Noah echoed like a verdict. He walked down the metal jet bridge, 2 security officers flanking him. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Everything, from the cold flicker of fluorescent lights to the faint gusts of air slipping through the cracks, carried the same message. He was being removed. At the gate, the older officer turned to him, his voice softening. "Sir, we understand this is unfortunate, but the captain has full authority. You can speak with the service desk to rebook your flight." Noah looked at him, his gaze so calm it unsettled the man for a brief moment. "No need," he said slowly. "You're just doing your job. And now, I'll do mine." The 2 officers nodded and walked away, leaving Noah standing alone amid the stream of passengers rushing to their own destinations. Overhead, the flight board flickered. Flight 372 to Zurich. Delayed. A cold breeze swept through. He didn't move. There was no anger, no outrage, only a sharp, glacial clarity. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a matte, black phone, encrypted for executive use. His fingers moved swiftly. Just 3 words: Lila Navarro. The call connected after 2 rings. "Boss?" came a woman's voice, low, steady, intelligent. "You're en route, right? We need you in Zurich before 10 a.m. "Change of plans," he said. A pause. "What happened?" Noah looked out through the glass wall, where the Global Alien Airways plane still sat idle on the tarmac. "I just had a live assessment," he said evenly, "and they failed it spectacularly." On the other end, Lila straightened. "You mean Beaumont Group's airline?" "That's right." "And note this down exactly," Noah said, eyes fixed on the window where the runway lights blinked through the darkness. "Ethereum Dynamics will proceed with the acquisition of Beaumont Group, but only on one condition, that they immediately divest Global Alien Airways from their assets." A heavy silence filled the line. "You want to cut the airline out of the deal?" "No," Noah said, his voice low and razor-sharp. "I want it erased from existence." The sound of a keyboard clattered faintly through the receiver. "Official reason?" Noah gave a faint smile, the kind of smile belonging to a man who had just discovered the perfect leverage in a high-stakes game. "Write this. Due to a critical failure in corporate culture and customer service protocols, resulting in complete loss of confidence in the brand's integrity, as witnessed firsthand by the CEO of Ethereum Dynamics." Lila exhaled, her tone a mix of awe and disbelief. "That's a killing blow. They'll have to sacrifice the airline to save the rest." "Exactly," Noah said. "Send it now. Mark it top priority. Copy Henri Beaumont and the entire board, and loop in our legal division in Zurich. Should I mention the incident specifically?" "No need," he said quietly. "They'll know." "Understood," Lila replied. "This message will reach them in 90 seconds. "Excellent," Noah said, then ended the call. He checked his watch. 9:14 p.m. The entire process had taken less than 2 minutes. 2 minutes to end a century. Old aviation dynasty. Through the thick glass, he could see figures moving inside the cockpit. The pilots who believed they'd won. The flight attendants pouring celebratory champagne for a smooth departure. None of them realized the ground beneath them was already cracking. A young airport attendant passed by, glancing at Noah with curiosity. The man stood still, not like someone who had been humiliated, but like someone waiting for lightning to strike. He slipped the phone into his jacket pocket and tightened his grip on the handle of his briefcase. In his mind, images replayed, the seat 1A, the contemptuous looks, the cold voices, and the words, "Get off." They were merely the spark. The explosion would consume the entire global alien empire. Somewhere across Europe's corporate networks, an email was being opened, the bold headline flashing like a decree. "Urgent. Revision of acquisition terms. Immediate divestment required." Noah looked at the aircraft one last time, the reflection of its lights burning like twin embers in his eyes. Then he turned, walking slowly, upright, without looking back. Behind him, Flight 372 still hadn't taken off, and it never would again. 9:16 p.m. in New York, and more than 3,600 miles away, an elegant dinner in Paris came to a halt. Inside the candlelit dining room of Henri Beaumont's Parisian estate, a servant had just finished pouring Bordeaux wine when the phone on the table buzzed with a distinct vibration. Henri frowned. Only one person in the world used that custom vibration to reach him, Evelyn from the investment board. He swiped the screen. On the black background appeared a message that froze his blood instantly. "Urgent. Revision of acquisition terms. From Lila Navarro, head of M&A, Ethereum Dynamics. Subject: immediate divestment of Global Alien Airways required." Henri sat motionless. He read each line slowly, as if every word was a knife driving into the legacy of his family. Due to a catastrophic failure in corporate culture and customer service protocols, leading to a fundamental loss of confidence in the asset's brand integrity, as personally witnessed by CEO Noah Kingsley. The glass in his hand trembled, slipped, and shattered on the marble floor like the breaking of fate itself. "Robert!" he shouted, calling for the man who oversaw the airline operations in London. "Get me Robert Grant right now." Robert Grant, 49, CEO of Global Alien Airways, was loosening his tie, ready for bed, when his phone began to ring relentlessly. Henri Beaumont's name flashed across the screen. The voice from Paris came through hoarse with panic. "Robert, check your email. Ethereum Dynamics just delivered a blow." Robert opened his laptop. As his eyes scanned the words personally witnessed by the CEO, his heart sank. "Oh God," he whispered. "Kingsley." Henri barked. "What happened with Kingsley? Where is he?" "JFK," Robert replied. "He was scheduled on Flight 372 to Zurich tonight." Henri's voice cracked. "And when they say witnessed personally, what does that mean? What did he see?" Robert glanced at the wall clock. 2 a.m. London time. The flight hadn't departed. He immediately called operations. "Get me Flight 372's status now." A trembling female voice answered. "Sir, the aircraft is still at the gate. There was a small issue with a first-class passenger. We're investigating." "Dear God," Robert cut her off. Was that passenger's name Noah Kingsley? The silence on the line was enough to confirm everything. He gripped the phone tighter and called Henri back. "I know what happened." "He was insulted, wasn't he?" Henri nearly hissed. "It seems so," Robert said, his voice rough. "If he was just thrown off our plane, the deal is dead. Not just dead, it's buried." Henri jumped to his feet, his chair clattering to the marble floor. "No, we have to stop this. If they circulate those new terms to the board, the entire conglomerate will collapse within 18 months. Robert swallowed hard, sweat slicking his palms. "I'll call operations at JFK. Keep that plane on the ground. Pull it back. Lock it down. Don't let it leave the gate." At that very moment, David Chen, the night operations manager, received a frantic call from London. "Hold Flight 372, Robert Grant shouted through the line. "Do not let it take off. I want the captain on the line now. And listen carefully, the passenger removed was Noah Kingsley. If you don't get him back on board, Global Alien is finished." David froze, his pulse pounding. He dropped the headset and bolted from his office, shouting across the terminal, "Stop the pushback! Hold position!" The warning siren blared. The jet bridge, which had just been detached, slowly rolled back toward the aircraft. Under the bluish-white lights, sweat glistened on David's forehead. He had no idea what had just happened, only that some mistake was now consuming his entire career, and possibly thousands of others. The engines, moments from roaring to life, powered down completely. Passengers looked up in confusion. In the cockpit, Captain Briggs scowled and barked into the intercom. "Ground control, what's going on? We're cleared for departure." The response crackled through with distortion. "Hold position, Captain. Orders from headquarters. A company representative is en route." Tessa looked out the window, her heartbeat quickening. The jet bridge was moving back into place. She didn't understand. She couldn't. But an icy dread crept up her spine, the unmistakable sense that a storm was coming, and she was standing at its center. Back in the Paris mansion, Henri Beaumont was frantically calling every board member he could reach. "We lose the entire deal if we don't sever the airline within 24 hours, he said, his voice raw and desperate. "Noah Kingsley just turned our mistake into a weapon of mass destruction." In London, Robert Grant gripped his phone tightly, his eyes fixed on the radar display showing Flight 372. The word "delayed" blinked in red like an omen of doom. He exhaled a single sentence, quiet and broken, more confession than statement. "It's not that he's flying with us. It's that we're all falling into his hands." The cabin door burst open, slamming against the metal wall with a sharp, echoing clang. Every head in first class turned, and then the room fell into absolute silence. A man in a wrinkled suit, drenched in sweat and gasping for breath, stormed inside. It was David Chen, the night operations manager at JFK Airport. His voice cracked as he nearly shouted, "Captain Briggs, who gave the order to remove that passenger from this plane?" Captain Briggs turned, frowning. "Who are you? We're about to depart." "Depart?" David cut him off, his voice shaking with fury. "You just threw off the one person this company could never, ever afford to touch." The cabin went still. The only sound left was the hiss of the air conditioning, carrying with it the cold, metallic scent of fear. Tessa froze, her hand still gripping the tablet on her wrist. Her lips trembled. What's going on?" David spun toward her, his eyes wild not with anger, but with something far worse, panic and despair. "You just threw Noah Kingsley off this plane." The name hit the cabin like thunder. Passengers glanced at one another, some gasping under their breath. Tessa took a step back. No, that's impossible. He lied. I checked." David's voice rose, raw and furious. "You didn't check anything." He pulled out his phone and thrust the glowing screen toward her. "He's the CEO of Ethereum Dynamics, the man buying out the entire Beaumont Group. And he just sent an email demanding Global Alien Airways be removed from the deal because of you. He owns the future of this company." Tessa's face went pale. Briggs stood frozen, his mouth open, but no words came out. David's chest heaved as he turned to the captain. "And you, Captain Briggs, you just signed the death warrant for this entire airline. Do you even understand what that means?" "Wait," Briggs croaked, his voice trembling. "I was just following procedure." He refused to comply. David slammed his hand against the seat, the sound reverberating through the cabin. "Refused to comply? You kicked off the man who's buying your company. A man holding a $43 billion acquisition in his hands." Briggs staggered back as if struck in the chest. The large man swayed slightly, his eyes wide, lips trembling. "No, that can't be," Tessa whispered, barely audible. I just thought there was a mistake. Mr. Whitford is a frequent flyer." David turned toward her, his voice breaking with disbelief. "You chose to trust a familiar face and a familiar color instead of the data in front of you. You chose bias over truth. And now, you've destroyed this company for all of us." A chill rippled through the cabin. Richard Whitford, the man in seat 2B holding a glass of champagne, suddenly felt the air drain from his lungs. He looked at David, forcing his voice to stay even. "This is an internal matter. David's eyes burned as he cut him off. "You simply thought you were entitled, didn't you? You thought your name was enough to make the world bow. And you were right. The world does bow, but not to you." Tessa stumbled back, her face colorless. Her trembling hands dropped the tablet to the floor with a hollow thud. David exhaled sharply, his voice now low and steady, almost mournful. "Tessa Marlowe, under the authority of JFK Operations, you are hereby suspended effective immediately pending termination. Hand over your ID." She blinked, stunned. "What? Why? I've worked for this airline for 23 years. And you just destroyed those 23 years in 23 minutes, David interrupted coldly, without a shred of sympathy. She covered her mouth, tears welling. But David had already turned away. Facing the cockpit, his tone hardened like steel. "Captain Briggs, you are temporarily relieved of command. The first officer will taxi the plane back to the gate. You and your crew will remain on board for the investigation team from headquarters." Briggs didn't argue. He just stood there, hollow-eyed, gripping his captain's hat as if it were the only thing left of his career. David looked around the cabin. Every passenger was silent, the same people who had once nodded in agreement now avoiding his eyes. His voice cracked as he spoke. This flight is officially cancelled. Everyone off the plane. Whitford began to protest, but one look from David silenced him instantly. In that moment, the entire structure of authority, captain, attendants, elite passengers, collapsed under 2 words: wrong person. As passengers began to disembark, David stood motionless in the empty cabin, his gaze fixed on seat 1A, the white leather still faintly indented where Noah had sat. He drew a long breath. There, in that silence, he realized he had just witnessed not only the downfall of a flight, but the fall of an empire. 3 in the morning. A small interrogation room, buried deep inside Global Alien Airways Operations Center at JFK, blazed with harsh fluorescent light. No windows, no clock. Only the cold metallic scent of the air and the suffocating stillness of something sealed shut, like a coffin lid. Tessa Marlowe sat across from a human resources representative, a woman in glasses whose expression was as unreadable as a mask. In front of Tessa lay a single sheet of paper, printed and ready, waiting only for her signature. "Ms. Marlowe," the woman said evenly, her voice devoid of emotion. "Under Article 12, Section C of your employment contract, you are hereby terminated effective immediately for actions resulting in severe damage to the company's reputation and financial interests." Every word cut through Tessa like a blade. She lowered her head, fingers tightening around the edge of the table. I've worked here for 23 years. I've never been disciplined." The woman didn't look up. "And today, you cost this company a $43 billion deal." Tessa let out a choked sob. "I didn't know. How could I have known who he was?" The HR representative gently pushed a box of tissues toward her. "That's precisely the problem, Ms. Marlowe. You weren't supposed to know. You were supposed to treat every passenger with the same respect." Tessa broke down, her sobs echoing off the sterile walls. The woman stood, gathering the document. "Security will escort you out. Your personal belongings have been packed." Tessa glanced around the empty room, nothing but white light and a red recording light blinking from the corner. 23 years reduced to a single cardboard box. The next morning, when she walked out of the airport, the sky was dull grey, and the wind carried the heavy smell of jet fuel. Her phone buzzed non-stop. Hundreds of messages, thousands of notifications. A video had gone viral. The camera angle was slightly tilted, but the image was painfully clear. Tessa standing before seat 1A, her voice sharp, saying, "Sir, your tone is becoming aggressive. I'm trying to help you." The clip spread like wildfire. Within hours, millions of views, hundreds of thousands of comments. A hashtag emerged. #Gatekeeper of the skies. People mocked her, edited memes, even created dance parodies mimicking her voice. Each time she opened her phone, her name appeared alongside words of ridicule. This is exactly why airline service is so terrible. A perfect face for arrogance. She shut her phone off, but the damage had already escaped the screen. Neighbors avoided her. Her son came home from school with red eyes and whispered, They played your video in class." Her husband, always a quiet man, started sleeping on the couch. The house grew as cold as an empty airplane cabin. A month later, Tessa began searching for work. She sent dozens of resumes, interviewed at smaller airlines. At first, things seemed promising, until the interviewer opened a laptop, typed a few words, and their expression changed. "Oh, you're that person." Each interview ended with a polite handshake and a cold smile. 23 years of experience couldn't save her from 5 minutes of prejudice. 7 months later, she was working at a supermarket in suburban New Jersey. Her uniform was a faded red vest with a name tag that read Tessa, head cashier. Every day was the same. The beep of scanners, the smell of cheap plastic, the blur of impatient customers. One humid afternoon, a middle-aged man approached her register, carrying a cooler and a bag of ice. He wore a suit, a silver watch, the look of someone familiar. Tessa looked up, her breath catching in her throat. It was Richard Whitford, the man who had stood behind her in first class. His eyes glimmered with cruel satisfaction. He leaned in slightly, his voice dripping with mockery. "Looks like they finally found the right place for you, Tessa." Then he walked away, the sound of his shoes striking the floor like hammers against her memory. Tessa stood still, the receipt still in her hand, her vision blurring. She didn't cry anymore. There were no tears left. Only a cold understanding remained. This was the feeling she had once made someone else endure. Karma doesn't strike like thunder. It arrives like the steady beeping of a scanner, over and over, reminding her that justice sometimes wears the face of the ordinary. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., an FAA investigation had begun. The next person to sit in that same interrogation room would be Captain Walter Briggs. But for him, punishment would not come through headlines or viral clips. It would come through silence, the very thing he had once mistaken for power. And somewhere above the clouds, Noah Kingsley was still flying. Not through the sky, but over the ashes of those who once believed they could command him. Not long after Tessa's video went viral, another room, 300 miles to the south, was bathed in the same harsh white light. On the wall, the emblem of the FAA glimmered faintly, like a seal of justice. Captain Walter Briggs sat across from 3 investigators. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to. They simply played the recording from the cockpit and the footage from seat 1A. His own voice echoed back through the speakers, flat and emotionless. "Now, gather your things and move to 4C, or I will have you removed from my aircraft." Then came Noah's voice, deep and calm, so controlled it was colder than anger itself. "You have boarded your own aircraft, sided with a man who is making a baseless claim, and threatened to remove a paying customer, all because you are worried about a 5-minute delay." When that last sentence played, Briggs lowered his head. One of the investigators spoke, his tone measured but firm. "Captain Briggs, in the 30 seconds you spent arguing with that passenger, you could have verified the ticket information. Why didn't you?" Briggs said nothing. There were no procedures left to hide behind, no orders to obey. Only one truth remained: arrogance. He left the room with his pilot's license still intact, but there were no flights waiting for him. Every major airline kept their distance, avoiding the name Briggs as if it were a permanent stain. Months later, he received his only offer from an old cargo company called Air Hall Express. From first-class cabins and champagne to overnight medical shipments in cramped cockpits, he fell into the mechanical heartbeat of a dying engine. His new co-pilot, Gus, a stocky man with grease-stained hands and a thick mustache, greeted him with one sentence. "Here, we don't have passengers to humiliate, Captain. Just cargo to deliver. And tonight, that cargo is you." Briggs didn't respond. He simply nodded, put on his headset, and stared through the scratched windshield. Above them, a Dreamliner streaked across the sky, leaving a glowing trail like a scar carved into the darkness. Gus chuckled hoarsely. "See that, Frank? That's the world you used to belong to. Now we're just truckers with wings." Briggs stayed silent. For the first time in his life, he truly felt small. One stormy night over the Rockies, the icing alarm sounded. Briggs calmly suggested a change in altitude, his voice still carrying the habit of command. Gus didn't look at him. "I fly this bird, co-pilot." The words were harmless on the surface, but to Briggs, they were a verdict. Every command he'd ever given to Noah now came back to haunt him, and this time, he was the one being told to get off. When they landed in Denver, Briggs stepped off the plane, removed his epaulets, and dropped them into a trash bin. He walked away from the sky forever. Meanwhile, in London, Richard Whitford sat in the boardroom of Sterling Price Holdings, facing 12 board members. Before him glowed a report bathed in red, over $12 million lost in the first week after the failed acquisition. No one spoke. Finally, the new chairman, a cold-eyed financier from an investment fund, slid a signed document across the table. "You should leave before we vote." Richard gave a weak laugh. "I'm a Whitford. I've sat on this board since before most of you were old enough to drink." The man's reply was glacial. "And that's exactly why we're losing. The world has changed, Mr. Whitford. You haven't." No one escorted him out. He left the building like a ghost, his phone silent. No calls coming in. A month later, the charities that once proudly listed his name sent polite letters of thanks, each with a quiet note at the end. "There's no need to return next year." He attended his annual gala, but those who once shook his hand now avoided his eyes, as if afraid to catch the contagion of disgrace. And the final blow came from within his own walls. His son, the heir he had groomed for decades, was terminated in a restructuring led by the new board. The Whitford family, once a symbol of the old order, was erased from relevance by a single flight and a single line. Some people just have to learn the hard way. Richard finally understood. He had learned, but far too late, and the cost was an entire legacy. In Zurich, inside a glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor, Noah Kingsley signed the final documents, completing the acquisition of Beaumont Group, without the airline attached. When he rose, camera flashes burst like lightning, and the next morning's financial headline read, "Ethereum Dynamics closes 43B deal with a new definition of accountability." Noah didn't celebrate. He simply turned toward the vast window, where planes looked like tiny insects lifting into the Swiss sky, and thought, the old world has fallen, and this time, no one can buy it back. 3 weeks later, Zurich was drenched in sunlight. The 42nd floor conference room of Ethereum Dynamics glowed under the reflection of the lake outside. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls framed the horizon, a symbol of the vision Noah Kingsley had just reclaimed. The international press conference was underway. Reporters filled every inch of the room, cameras flashing and lenses focused, waiting for the CEO who had just shaken an entire European conglomerate to speak. Noah stepped up to the podium. No tie microphone, no LED screens behind him. Just him, standing tall, composed, the morning light glinting off the glass floor beneath his feet like a halo of quiet authority. "The acquisition between Ethereum Dynamics and Beaumont Group," he began, his voice steady and resonant, "has been officially completed. But we did not just purchase assets. We are redefining a concept, accountability." He paused, scanning the room. "In this era, companies do not collapse because of numbers. They collapse because of culture. Because arrogance hides behind procedure, and prejudice disguises itself in polite language." The room fell completely still. Noah continued, his voice calm but deliberate. "We are calling this new initiative the Airline Accountability Fund. It was born from an extraordinarily costly lesson, one that I witnessed firsthand on a flight I'm sure you've all heard about." A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd, then faded. Noah gave a faint, almost wistful smile. "I will not mention any names. History has already written that part. But I will say this. Justice is not punishment. It is transformation." The screen behind him came to life, displaying the fund's core initiatives. Full scholarships at Howard and Spelman for students studying business ethics and management. A partnership with MIT to develop an AI system that measures empathy index within internal communications to detect early signs of bias or abuse of authority. And a global leadership training program where CEOs must spend 72 hours working anonymously at the lowest levels of their own companies. The room was silent. This was not a speech. It was a verdict rendered in civility, a new form of justice written into policy. Noah closed his notebook and looked directly at the front row, where the major investors sat in rapt attention. "Do not mistake this for revenge," he said softly, his tone intimate, almost confessional. "I am not taking revenge on anyone. I am simply giving the world back what it lost. Respect." As he stepped down from the stage, applause broke out. Not loud or frenzied, but deep and deliberate, like distant thunder rolling across the earth, steady enough to shake the ground beneath. That evening, a video spread across social media. It showed Noah Kingsley leaving the conference hall, stepping into the golden light of the Zurich sunset. A reporter shouted, "Mr. Kingsley, do you think you've won?" He stopped, smiled faintly. "No," he said, "I haven't won. I've simply reminded everyone that every seat must be earned through dignity, not privilege." Then he walked on, leaving behind the sunset spilling across the pavement like a ribbon of gold, a symbol of a new era, one led by those who were once underestimated, who learned to rise, to stay silent, and to triumph through wisdom. Late at night in Zurich, the hotel room was so quiet that the sound of wind slipping through the window frame could be heard. Noah Kingsley stood by the glass, a glass of whiskey shimmering in his hand, his gaze fixed on the sky. Far in the distance, the lights from the airport traced thin silver lines across the darkness, like the lifeline of fate itself. He wasn't thinking about the deal, nor the headlines calling him the man who made Europe kneel. He was thinking about one moment, the moment he rose from seat 1A, and the world decided he did not belong there. Now, that very seat had become a metaphor for an entire system, and he had broken it. Somewhere else, in a cramped apartment in New Jersey, Tessa Marlowe stood in line at the checkout counter of the very supermarket where she worked. She watched a manager, 20 years her junior, barking orders at the staff, his tone arrogant, detached. She smiled faintly, a sad, knowing smile. Every kind of power, she thought, comes with an expiration date. High above the Midwest night, a cargo plane drifted quietly through the clouds. Captain Walter Briggs sat in the jump seat, his epaulets gone, eyes following the dimming city lights below. For a fleeting moment, he saw something he had never truly seen before. The sky looks different when you no longer have your hands on the controls. And in London, Richard Whitford sat alone in his mansion, the ticking clock echoing through the room. On the television, a business report showed Noah Kingsley shaking hands with world leaders. Richard let out a bitter laugh. "He didn't steal my seat," he murmured. "He just took it back." Outside Noah's window in Zurich, another plane lifted into the night, its white contrail cutting across the sky like a stroke of light through darkness. Noah watched it rise, took a slow sip of his drink, and whispered, "Justice doesn't fall from the sky. It rises from the ground." From the perspective of a specialist in corporate culture and ethics, Noah Kingsley's story is not merely a tale of revenge in the skies, but a vivid illustration of how power evolves in the modern era. In that evolution, those who once believed themselves to be above are brought down, not by retaliation, but by truth. And the man who was once underestimated chose to respond not with fury, but with intellect. Noah did not destroy anyone. He simply forced the world to look in the mirror and recognize that every privilege has an expiration date. The justice he delivered was not loud. It was calm, precise, and impossible to escape. If you believe that respect is the foundation of all lasting power, press like to spread that message, and subscribe so you won't miss the stories that explore consequence, justice, and dignity. Before you leave, share your comment. I respect.